All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. It is the last day of BV Dev Days, right? I think. Um, so today we're here to talk about a hot topic, which is data ethics and privacy in the AI context. Yesterday on the main stage, Nina Needell called herself and Jerry the Wonder Twins. Carrie and I are more like good cop, bad cop. So I will give you guys two guesses as to who the bad cop is. Spoiler, it is the lawyer. Before we begin, a little fine print from me. Though I am an attorney, I am not your attorney. So nothing I say today should constitute legal advice or opinion. Please consult with your own organization's legal counsel for advice on your particular facts and circumstances. So I am Cameron Stoll. I'm the Senior Director of Privacy Management. I am a certified information privacy professional in EU and US laws and a certified information privacy manager under the IAPP. I am a lawyer, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the day, and I have been at Blackbaud for about 7 years. I am joined today by the glorious Carrie Cobb.
Thank you, Cameron. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm Carrie Cobb, Chief Data Officer here at Blackbaud. So excited to be with you today. I have the fortune to lead our enterprise data practice with amazing experts across the organization and the social impact community as well. So, Cameron, let's get it started.
Carrie fails to mention she's been here for 20 years, but I always like to throw it in.
I know. I never like to age myself.
I know. I'm sorry. She started when she was 12,
Thank you.
and she's been here for 20 years. So, first, Carrie and I are going to give you some foundational knowledge about ethics, which is her area, and privacy, which is my area. Next, Carrie will play good cop and cover the rise of AI. I will play bad cop and talk us through some potential risks and harm presented by AI. And then finally, we'll present best practices that you can incorporate into your AI initiatives.
Perfect. So let's begin with an introduction to both data ethics and privacy. So today, data systems and algorithms can be deployed at an unprecedented scale and speed, and there's potential that unintended consequences will affect people at that same scale and that same speed. And so data ethics is a concept we're all facing today, especially with the ascent of AI. So its relevance today points to the power of data in our data-driven digital economy. So let's talk about the definition of data ethics. It's the moral obligation of gathering, protecting, and using personal information and how it affects individuals. It's the branch of ethics that studies and evaluates moral problems related to data, including its generation, recording, curation, processing, dissemination, sharing, and use. The algorithms that are associated with it, so including artificial intelligence, artificial agents, machine learning, and more. And then the corresponding practices as well, so including responsible innovation and programming, hacking, and professional codes. Again, all in order to formulate and support morally good solutions. And trust in that data is not only about knowing what you're doing at that given moment, but really understanding what's happening with it and how it's being respected across the entire life cycle. So the accepted tenets of bioethics, documented by the US Department of Health and Human Services, which really focused on preserving human dignity, actually provided the starting point for the principles of data ethics that we all here know today. So data ethics as we know them today started with 3 principles. The first was respect for persons. So this principle reflects the fundamental ethical requirement that people are treated in a way that respects their dignity and autonomy as human individuals. It also requires that in cases where people have diminished autonomy, extra care be given to protect their dignity and rights. For example, unethical use of data can directly influence people's interactions, their employment opportunities, and even their place in the community. Second, beneficence. So this principle has two elements. First, do no harm. And then second, maximize the possible benefit while minimizing that possible harm. So the ethical principles of do no harm has a really long-standing history in medical ethics, but there is clear application in the context of data and information management. For example, examining whether your process is unnecessarily invasive and to reflect on whether there's a less risky way to meet the requirements while still accomplishing whatever your business need may be. And then third was justice. So this principle considers the fairness and equitable treatment of people. So some questions that you would think about here are people or groups of people being treated equally under similar circumstances? And does the outcome of the process or the algorithm that you're creating result in effects that disproportionately either benefit or harm certain groups of people? So then the US Department of Homeland Security later adopted these principles to create the ethical principles guiding information and communication technology research. It's a mouthful. By adding the fourth principle here, and that's respect for law and public interest. And this principle considers privacy as a human right and challenges us all as innovators to see privacy, dignity, and autonomy from a data perspective as well.
So privacy is focused on the controls around the use of personal data. And personal data is any information that relates to an identified or identifiable individual. This includes name, address, banking information, and even IP address. Stop thinking about PII in the old school way. Personal data is pretty much anything that can be linked to an individual. Next slide. So here are the GDPR data protection principles. I like this version. There's a whole lot of versions out there of the fundamental principles of privacy. There's the fair information practice principles, which the FTC adopted, the Australian privacy principles, the Canadian PIPEDA fair information principles, and a bunch more. I like these because they're really consumable and basically they've become the global standard for privacy rules. So the first is that use must be lawful, fair, and transparent. This lawful key, it really is the basis for why the Italian Data Protection Authority initially shut down ChatGPT, because one big privacy principle is that you have to have a lawful basis for using information. And the Italian Supervisory Authority basically said, ChatGPT, you sucked up all this personal information. What's your basis for using it? Did you get people's consent? Are you relying on another justification, like having a legal, a legitimate interest for using it? Are you doing it for, scientific research, that sort of thing? The second is that personal data must be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes and not further used in an incompatible way. Don't collect an email address for purposes of sending a, fundraising email and then do something totally different, like, sell it to someone without stating that you're doing this in your privacy policy. Third, personal data must be adequate, relevant, and limited to what's necessary to achieve the purposes for which it was collected. Basically, don't collect and use a whole bunch more data than you actually need to do the thing. So if you never ever intend to call someone, don't collect their phone number. Personal data must be accurate and kept up to date, and you have to take reasonable steps to rectify or erase inaccurate data. Personal data must not be kept in identifiable form for longer than necessary. Personal data must be used in a way that ensures security of that data and protects it from unauthorized use. And then finally, accountability. You have to be able to demonstrate that you comply with the principles I just talked about.
So now that we have our foundational elements, I will play that good cop, as I always do, and talk about the rise of artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is a source of both incredible excitement and incredible apprehension. The data scientist in me always starts with the excitement. Uh, Recently, PwC research shows that global GDP could be up to 14% higher in 2030 just as a result of AI, the equivalent of an additional 15.7 trillion, making it the biggest commercial opportunity in today's fast changing economy. The study suggests that the economic impact of AI will be driven by three things. One, the productivity gains from businesses automating processes. Two, productivity gains from businesses augmenting their existing labor force. And three, increased consumer demand resulting from the availability of both personalized or AI enhanced products and services. So just think about the last few months and how generative AI has changed so many conversations. This chart displays the time it took for online services to reach just 1 million users. ChatGPT gained 1 million users in just 5 days after launching in November last year, just 5 days. Other popular online services, generally, they've taken much longer to hit that 1 million mark. Instagram is among those that came the closest, achieving 1 million users in 2.5 months. Twitter in 2.5 years, or 2 years, and Netflix in 3.5 years. And if we continue to look at the user records, ChatGPT gained 100 million users in just 2 months, compared to 9 months for TikTok, 3.5 years for WhatsApp, and 4.5 years for Facebook. So if we think about the social good community, AI is and will continue to be harnessed for social, economic, and environmental good. With the global population projected to grow to 9.7 billion in 2050, or by 2050, there is an opportunity for amazing, amazing benefits. AI-enabled agriculture will help farmers meet the demand for 50% more crops on ever-shrinking land resources. AI-powered diagnostics will help use patients' unique history as a baseline against which small deviations can flag a possible health condition in need of further investigation or treatment. AI-enabled technology utilized within research projects like Blackbox, funded by the VA, will analyze data from smartphones, laptops, and other devices to help prevent veteran suicide. And AI will dramatically improve the ability to scan billions of online posts and web pages for suspicious content to protect children and others from trafficking and abuse. So again, the optimist in me thinks that we have hardly scratched the surface of what's possible in improving human life and the health of the planet. From climate change to crime, terrorism, disease, famine, AI promises to help alleviate these and other global issues. Now, when we typically talk about AI, we talk about the potential in new products, new services, or solving those really big social issues like the previous slide. But there's an incredible potential benefit for us all here as we put on our employee hats at our respective organizations as well. So according to Harvard Business Review, companies that drive initiatives to enhance employee experience are 4 times more profitable than those that do not. In addition, studies demonstrate that effective and relevant day-to-day work experience is essential for retaining top talent. Thriving employees are 3 times more likely to work for a company that enables quick decisions and provides tools and resources for them to do their jobs efficiently. So here's where I see AI coming into play. 69% of employees expect automation will give them more time to do their primary duties. And 86% of employees think that the use of automation will let them think of work in new and innovative ways.
And now for the doom and gloom. Next slide, please. All right. We'll start with the harm that AI poses to individuals. Now, first is often talked about in the press, job losses. Despite Carrie's optimism, It's inevitable that AI will automate some roles out of existence. Goldman Sachs estimates that 300 million jobs could be lost because of AI, with the impact highest in administrative and legal professions. Oh, joy. So, this might be the last time you hear from me. Second is that these models are being used to make very critical decisions like whether or not someone is creditworthy, should be given financial aid, receive benefits, is insurable, you're probably also actuary tables, like how long they're going to live, etc. If the outputs are not accurate, those individuals could be irreparably harmed. Now, remember, this isn't a future issue. This is happening, and this kind of AI has been in use for many years. An interesting thing about this is that some privacy laws, both the GDPR as well as new state privacy laws, have been requiring an opt-out for automated processing that results in significant impacts on the individual. So that would be things like depriving them of employment or financial benefits, credit, that kind of thing. So these opt-outs do actually exist, and people are paying a lot more attention. A really interesting aspect of these laws and a lot of the discussion around it is if there is any human involvement in the decision. So maybe the AI proposes a recommendation, but a human actually accepts or denies that recommendation, then it's not a decision that's based entirely on automated processing. So keep an eye in that space. That's going to be really, really interesting. So back to harmed individuals. The third is bias. And certainly you've heard a lot about bias in AI. Any bias in the training data is going to be perpetuated in the output. So if there are no female scientists in training data, when asked what a scientist looks like, the result will be male. Even worse than bias is flat out hate speech. There's been a proliferation of outputs containing racist or misogynistic content. And of course, when your models suck up the whole of the internet, they're going to consume some nasty stuff. So OpenAI even had a red team go in and scrub hate speech out of ChatGPT. Because of this, people like Elon Musk have been interested in creating a non-scrubbed AI. So Elon wants to create Truth GPT, which will not be trained to be politically correct, like ChatGPT allegedly is. I'm not wading into that at all, but very interesting stuff. Next slide. AI poses IP risks. You need to keep these first 2 points in mind because copyright is the primary mechanism for protecting software code. So generative AI faces a lot of copyright battles at the moment. For example, AI art tools are being sued by content creators and owners like Getty Images for scraping their copyrighted work and training their models on it. Even open source code makers are getting into the battle. Despite popular belief, open source does not mean use it however you please. Most open source licenses require attribution of the author, notice of their copyright, and a copy of the license to ensure that future coders can credit the authors. Some open source code writers have sued Copilot for training on publicly available open source code from GitHub, but not including any of these required actions. Secondly, pay attention to this one. There's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not outputs are protectable. The US Copyright Office weighed in on this topic just in March. Copyright registration only applies to work if the creative elements of work were conceived by a human. So if you're in marketing and you're asking the AI to write copy for you, but not giving it sufficient creative direction, it would not be copyrightable, right? So if I go in and I say, write me a poem about flowers, that output won't be copyrightable. What does this mean in practice? It means that anyone can use and commercialize your work word for word and leave you with no recourse if the work you're putting out there isn't copyrightable. So keep that in mind. It's a fast developing area because the Copyright Office and the USPTO have really never had to deal with things like this on a wide scale basis. And then finally, please never forget that anything you share with a non-enterprise version of an AI tool could be retained and used to further train the model. So if you're using a free version of a tool, the data that you put into it, the prompts, etc., may be in its knowledge base. Samsung employees found this out the hard way because they leaked some top secret Samsung data by putting it into ChatGPT. They were using it to check confidential source code for errors, putting notes from confidential meetings into ChatGPT to have it summarized for them. OpenAI has since added an opt-out to using prompts to train the ChatGPT model, and they're working on an enterprise version called ChatGPT Business, which won't use your data to train its model. Next slide, please. Generative AI can easily be used to perpetrate crimes. You may have recently heard about criminals who used AI to mimic a child's voice, then fake a kidnapping and seek ransom money for it, which is pretty scary stuff. And on the humorous side, we've also seen generated photos of the Pope in a giant puffer coat and Trump getting arrested. But all this means that the new wave of misinformation is here and seemingly unstoppable. There have been moves to add sort of a reverse authentication. So you would authenticate with a digital signature images that have been created using generative AI tools. Hopefully that will become the norm, and anything lacking it will be understood to possibly be a manipulated image, but answer hazy as to what's actually going to happen in the end. Next, AI can pose risks to privacy. So I talked about this earlier in the foundational section, but some models suck up any data on the internet that isn't password protected or on the dark web, which includes a huge amount of personal data. Most people don't know that this is happening with their information and have no way to exercise their rights. As I said before, ChatGPT was initially shut down in Italy by its supervisory authority for violating the GDPR. And Japan, as of maybe yesterday or 2 days ago, is also investigating. So to get turned back on in Italy, OpenAI had to, as I said before, assign a legal basis for processing. They said that it was using this data to further their legitimate business interests, and they had to provide a way for people in Italy to opt out, basically to object to the use of their personal information for this purpose. So if you are located in the EU or UK, you can fill out a form that says, I object, please take my data out of the training set. And then finally, any AI is subject to cybersecurity threats. These are just a few of the tactics used against AI. So the first is model inversion. It's a type of AI attack where an attacker tries to infer personal information about a data subject by exploiting the outputs. Model evasion is a type of attack in which an attacker manipulates the input data to cause the AI to make incorrect predictions or decisions. The goal of an evasion attack is to bypass the system's defenses by crafting input data specifically designed to mislead or deceive the model. And then finally, poisoning is when attackers inject malicious or misleading information into the training data, causing the AI system to learn incorrect patterns or relationships between input data and target outputs. And last but not least, stop assuming that AI is correct. I asked it a question, who leads privacy at Blackbaud? This is ChatGPT. And it gave me the answer that Eric Edelman did or does. He is a 70-year-old American diplomat who was the US ambassador to Turkey and Finland. He has no privacy background and no relationship to Blackbaud. You may have heard in the news, a seasoned lawyer in New York is facing sanctions for using ChatGPT to do his legal research, and he included 6 cases ChatGPT gave him, the case names, the case citations, and the quotes that came from them were all entirely made up. They sounded real, but they didn't exist. This all just illustrates that AI is a tool. It is not all-knowing, not at this point, and it's not all-powerful like HAL in 2001: Space Odyssey. These tools are only as accurate as the data they're trained on. So always review your outputs with a critical lens.
So now that we've covered the good, the bad, the optimism, the doom, the gloom, let's talk about best practices for our AI initiatives as we all move forward leaving today. So in 2019, the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence set up by the European Commission published the Ethics Guide for Trustworthy Artificial Intelligence, and you see them all here. The guideline outlined 7 requirements for trustworthy AI. They include human agency and oversight, meaning the AI should empower humans, allowing them to make informed decisions and foster their fundamental rights. Technical robustness and safety, meaning AI needs to be resilient and it needs to be secure. It needs to be safe, accurate, reliable, and reproducible. Privacy and governance, meaning that besides ensuring full respect for privacy and data protection, adequate data governance mechanisms also have to be in place, taking into account the quality, the integrity of the data, and ensuring legitimized access to that data as well. Transparency, meaning AI and its decisions should be explained in a manner adapted to the human that's using it. Humans also need to be aware that they're interacting with AI and have to be informed on its capabilities as well as its limitations. Diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness, meaning unfair bias must be avoided, as it could have multiple negative implications from marginalization of vulnerable groups to the exacerbation of prejudice and discrimination. Societal and environmental well-being, AI should benefit all humans, including today and future generations, including being sustainable and environmentally friendly. And finally, accountability, meaning mechanisms have to be in place to ensure responsibility and accountability for the AI and its outcomes. So auditability of algorithms, its data, the design, these all play key roles in its requirements.
So let's dig into each one of these with some takeaways that you can use. So first up is human agency and oversight. For this best practice, you should be thinking about the human element. How will it impact human users? Will it be addictive or too impactful, like making decisions that can deprive them of a fundamental human right? I talked about earlier, AI making decisions about creditworthiness. These have real harms for society at large, right? Because if the AI is trained on biased inputs, the outputs would be biased as well. So keep that in mind. Does the human being affected by the AI get a choice? I talked about the opt-out for automated processing having significant or legal decisions or impacts on them. That is an element here, but it's not required in all jurisdictions or for all different types of decisions. Do people get to know AI is making the decisions? What's the level of human involvement on our side? Is a human involved in every decision output before it's final? As I talked about earlier, if you go in and take an AI recommendation, but accept it or change it, that's called human in the loop. Next, is a human involved in every stage of design? This is called human on the loop. And then finally, is a human deciding when or how to use the AI at all? This is called human in command. Next slide, please. Technical robustness and safety. This slide is both about cybersecurity and general safety issues. Earlier, I touched on some types of cyber threats that AI faces. So did you build the system using your organization's typical security measurements and requirements that are tailored to stave off normal cybersecurity attacks? Does it align or comply with cybersecurity frameworks that your other work has to? Do you have a process for addressing risk? Are there any safety concerns if your output isn't accurate? Probably not applicable for this crowd, but think about self-driving cars. And then finally, do you have the ability to test the accuracy of training data and the accuracy of your outputs to avoid safety issues? Privacy and data governance. These items are going to look very familiar to the data protection principles that I highlighted in the beginning. The first two items here are ones that I touched on earlier. Do you have a proper legal basis for using constituent data in this way? Is it with their consent, for your legitimate interests, for a public purpose, or something else? Can you let them opt out of it? And what can they opt out of? Are they opting out of their data being used to train models or AI making decisions about them? To let them opt out of AI-related uses of their data, it requires you to be transparent that you're using data in this way. Have you made it really clear in your privacy policy that you're letting AI make decisions about them or feeding their data to AI models? The next one is a privacy impact assessment. Go back 2 slides, Catherine. Yeah, great. Perfect. If you don't have a standard privacy impact assessment at your organization, there's a really great form at the UK ICO website. That's the Information Commissioner's Office. That's the data czar of the UK. They have a really great one. Fill one out to help you identify any places where your proposed use of AI may have impacts on your constituents' privacy rights. Next, bringing in the data minimization principle. Can you accomplish the same thing with less data? And saving the most important for last, in my opinion, please read those T's and C's for your AI tool to make sure that the personal data you're putting into it can't be used by the AI to give it to other organizations or to train the model. So at best, that would be a disclosure of data to a third party. At worst, it probably constitutes a data breach, which I can speak from experience, nobody wants to deal with.
Next is transparency. So transparency in AI means having traceability, explainability, and open communication about the limitations that may exist in what you're building. So for this best practice, think about, did you properly document the development and the deployment of the AI? Did you think about the entire life cycle? So what came before you and where you are in the process and what comes after? Did you document what training data you used alongside how it was collected and any limitations there might be in that data? Did you explain the decisions or the recommendations that you were making sure that the user understands each and every one of those decisions? Did you let users know that they're interacting with an AI system instead of a human being? And finally, did you educate or inform users on the purpose, the criteria, as well as the limitations of the AI system itself? Next is diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness, meaning inclusion and diversity have to exist throughout the entire life cycle. AI should be user-centric, and it should be designed in a way that allows people to use the product or service regardless of their age, gender, abilities, or characteristics. So for this best practice, think about, have you established procedures to avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias in training data and your algorithm design? Did you include the broad participation in the AI design and development? So did you consult with your community around you, pulling in various experiences and expertise along the way? And do you follow things like universal design principles and accessibility standards, also called inclusive design or barrier-free design within your process as well? Next is societal benefit and environmental well-being, meaning that the broader society and environment should be considered as a stakeholder within your process. AI should be used to benefit all humans, again, those here today and future generations. So for this best practice, think about, did you assess the impact of the AI beyond that end user? So for example, society at large. Did you evaluate the environmental impact of the deployment, the development before that, and even the use of AI on the environment? If a human and the work associated is impacted, have you provided training opportunities for reskilling or upskilling? And finally, what measures are taken to ensure that the AI system doesn't negatively impact human deliberation or the democratic process, including not only the political decisions, but the electoral contexts as well? Next slide, Catherine. Perfect. And finally, accountability. So accountability requires that mechanisms be put into place to make sure that there is responsibility for the development, for the deployment, and the use of the AI system itself. So for best practices here, think about, have you established mechanisms to audit the AI to include traceability, sourcing of the training data, logging of the process, the outcomes, and the impact? Are there opportunities to report vulnerabilities or risks or bias in the AI along the way? Do you continuously monitor and assess the AI's adherence to the trustworthy AI principles that we've been talking about here today? This is where that impact assessment that Cameron was talking about just a few slides ago is incredibly impactful. And also, did you provide and prioritize the training that you and your teams need throughout this entire journey that we're all on?
Thanks, Carrie. So we have reached the end of our planned content for today. We can turn it over to Q&A if there are any questions in the chat that we can answer in this forum. But first, I have to plug my team's new customer resource, which is the Privacy Resource Center, where you can learn more about privacy basics, how to accomplish privacy best practices in your Blackbaud solutions, and information about privacy laws that might apply to you. Just a heads up, there's a whole lot of new ones. So my team is going to be periodically putting up new white papers for all these new privacy laws. So please check it out. Go to that. And if there are any questions, we can hopefully I can govern on the fly.
I think there is one question here. Does your team differentiate US versus EU versus Canadian privacy laws?
Our team does differentiate between laws. If you want to go between the different laws, so if you source cite their papers by country, so you can take a look at all the new US laws, you can take a look at GDPR content. Canada, we've got a few different Canadian laws up there right now. We have PIPEDA, we also have the new Quebec data privacy, comprehensive privacy law, some information about hosting in the US versus in Canada. So lots of good things by country. And if you're in New Zealand and Australia, they're in there too. Ooh. Is there currently any thought globally about consequences for when people develop AI that goes against these principles? I mean, it's a great question. So if you've been following the legislative activity, the geography that is closest to having some legislation in place is the EU. The European Commission started on the AI Act, that's the name of it, pretty simple, 2 years ago. So they were forward thinking and they're still not quite finished. So if that gives you any indication of when I think we'll have legislation in place, it's going to be a long tail. I think the EC is going to do it first with the AI Act, and ultimately there are financial penalties for organizations that are putting out AI that goes against these principles. And what we showed you, these key trustworthy AI principles, that comes from the European Commission. So most likely the final draft of the AI Act is going to look a lot like that. There are some like prohibited categories of AI entirely that they're just saying, okay, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow to develop these types of artificial intelligence. And then for everybody else, you have to follow these trustworthy AI principles. So most likely it'll be financial penalties. It's really going to be very hold individuals accountable. It'll mostly be on the organizational basis. Examples of prohibited AI. So there's a really interesting one. So a lot of them are around biometrics, public surveillance, and then also this category called social credit, which is essentially, there's a lot of talk about the Chinese government developing sort of a social credit rating. How often you donate blood, if you're an organ donor, your level of volunteerism, your level of patriotism. That kind of social credit rating is explicitly prohibited by the European Commission's proposed AI Act. So interesting stuff there. I highly recommend that you Google it. Exposing Blackbaud trade secrets. Please don't. But you, if you are a customer, you probably won't be able to. So that's the. I really hope you're not. But we are not putting source code into publicly available generative AI tools. So I don't think you worry about that. If you ever have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me and Carrie. You can always email privacy@blackbaud.com for privacy-specific questions, and someone on my team will be able to answer you. Or you can find us on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cameron.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Love the conversation.